Welcome to the info session for Bloodstone and Lime, the new 2-year Soul Priestess training program with the Mount Shasta Goddess Temple. We are here on this first page of our slides, and you're going to see my 3 little muertitos, my little friends here. They're going to kind of companion us along the journey today. They'll be popping up here and there. These are my 3 little guides who have been with me since 2018. This work is the culmination of many years of study and practice. When I first was ordained as a priestess in 2007, I didn't have a lot of experience, presiding at like funerals or memorial services or things like that, but I had a lot of experience with death. Ever since I was a small child, I have had a curious relationship with death and with the elderly. I've had elderly friends for as long as I can remember. I've worked in an over 60 clinic. My mom was the director of Health and Human Services for a senior project. She started a memory care center for people with Alzheimer's. When I was growing up, alongside my mom, we would deliver meals to people who were homebound, often elderly, every Thanksgiving and Christmas. I remember one time my mom coming and sitting me down and asking me where I went when I would go outside and play. I think I'm probably dating myself because this was the 80s, and you could send your children out and they would just go run wild, and I did. And what I used to do is I used to go down to the local nursing home that was a few blocks away, and I would stop in a big field of wildflowers on the way, and I would pick a bundle of wildflowers, and then I would go into the nursing home and I would just walk up and down the halls and stop into the rooms and give people a flower and talk with them a little while. And eventually the director of the nursing home found out who I was and called my mom and said, "Did you know your daughter is doing this?" And my mom didn't. Um, I've always had a close relationship with the realm of aging and dying for as long as I can remember. I started to make this work conscious a number of years ago. In 2014, 2015, I began a process of really studying funerary practices, the herbs and flowers that are appropriate for end of life rituals, end of life ceremonies, the process of death and dying, Buddhist practices at the end of life to help stabilize the mind for transition, the death practices of the Victorian period, of the early American people, of the peoples of all over the world, ancient Greece, Rome, Egypt. And since then, I've been on a journey of learning. And what this program arose out of is really twofold. One is that I've done a lot of ancestor work, and ancestor work is very important to me, a very important part of my practice, a depth of healing for me and for my family. And then because I also was receiving requests to teach a class about the end of life, I realized that I didn't want to teach anyone about the end of life who didn't already have a strong working relationship with their own ancestors. And so this program is, the first year is about really going in and doing healing work, personal work, and magical work to connect with, bond with, and potentiate the relationships that you have with near or distant benevolent ancestors. And then the second year is about taking everything you've learned in that first year through your own practice, adding onto it and turning it outward so that you're able to be available for friends, family members, members of your community, or others who are seeking help, comfort, information, support, and solace at the end of life or after a loss. So the dead, the dying, and the grieving are the people that we're working with and the people that we're working for, working to help. And there's two objectives for this program. For year one, we're each going to be developing a personal path of ancestor reference that is relevant to your own family's traditions, your own cultural heritage, your own magical preferences, your comfort. This work will be a foundation for you of learning healing methodologies, learning how to acknowledge the unacknowledged, working through meditation and shamanic journeying to find and offer healing energy or solace to ancestors who might be in the bloodline causing lingering trouble or harm as a result of their harm. Helping to elevate benevolent and beloved ancestors with offerings, helping to elevate those who died forgotten or whose names are no longer mentioned or who were ostracized, or helping to correct tendencies that you find in yourself or in your family, your immediate family, or your more distant family, as a way of healing the entire ancestral line. The DNA that is in us gives us access to both the past and the future. And then by the end of the first year, you will be developing a legacy project that could be, for example, putting together photo albums or doing some genealogy. It might be creating a really beautiful profile of an ancestor, or building a shrine, connecting with a particular ancestor as a trustworthy guide. There will be a lot of different ways that this can manifest for each person, because each of us is unique, and I'm here to teach methodologies, and you're going to fill in the content with what's relevant to you. And at the end of that year, we will each have practiced, in some ways, some of the hardest things that people face when they come to the end of life. We will have dealt with forgiveness and reconciliation. We will have dealt with boundaries and release. We will have coped with mechanisms of grief and grief behaviors. We will have analyzed physical, mental, spiritual, and psychological challenges that manifest in the family line as a result of certain epigenetic traumas or conditions. And we will have set ourselves firmly on a path going forward of how our own lives can be a blessing to those who came before us and those who may come after us. In year two, then we will take all of this and start to turn it outward. We'll delve into the process of becoming a death midwife. Some people may find that doing the first year is enough, and I want to just completely respect that. If you're here for, I want to do my ancestor work, I'm not sure I'm ready to be a death midwife, that's totally fine. By the end of the first year, however, you may find that now that you have done all this work for yourself and you've developed these skills, that other people around you, even people close to you, family members or friends, are coming to you because of the steadiness, the compassion, and the generosity of spirit that you bring. And you may find that people are seeking you out as a death midwife. If that's the case, if you feel that connection, then I just want you to know that you are welcome to come along for that second year of learning even skills that will benefit our own families, but that might potentially benefit in a much larger sense the communities that we serve. And in the second year, we'll be focusing more on practical end of life issues, coping with loss, doing psychopomp work for spirits that are stuck, that aren't necessarily directly related to us, helping people cross over with dignity, and how you are in a dance with grief, how you hold space for the grief of others without getting lost in it yourself. So these are our objectives: to develop a very strong foundation and personally relevant path of ancestor veneration in the first year that will touch upon a lot of different aspects. And then in the second year, to bring all of that and more out into the world where it's needed. Conventionally speaking, death midwives are going to be needed in the next 10 to 20 years, more than at almost any other period in history before this, because the baby boomers are coming to the ends of their lives. And this is the largest single birth population that has ever happened in the United States since the time of colonization. And when we saw this birth explosion happen in the late 1940s and early 50s, there was a cultural realization of the need for there to be end-of-life care for these individuals. And a whole lot of different social welfare programs cropped up during this time and in the post-World War II period, including programs around pensions and Social Security and medical end-of-life issues. And then in the last 20 years, we've watched the erosion of those programs through various different fate and government and money and issues like that. And also because our society has become increasingly disconnected from death as more and more people are sort of shuttled into end-of-life facilities and then left to die there in a way by society. Our immediate relationship with death as a society has changed. For our generation, loosely speaking, those of us who are seeing that our elders are passing and wanting to be part of a movement of healing around end of life issues, we are going to, in the next 10 years, have a lot of work ahead of us to reintroduce death as a natural phase of life, to help people overcome the fear and squeamishness that they have about death, to help people cope with some of the normal end of life problems that have arisen in our modern society, such as depression, anxiety, hoarding, depersonalization, and dementia. And we will be doing all of that through a spiritual lens, because without that spiritual lens, it's left to an entirely mechanical medical model. Our job is to be angels of mercy at the deathbed, but also in the afterlife, in the other world, for those who need it. So each month in each of the 2 years, we'll be coping with different themes. The first year themes are as follows. In January, when we start, we're actually going to go into our familial origins, our family cosmology and beliefs. What are the beliefs that our families have held about life, about death, about the divine? How have these impacted us? What have we adopted from those beliefs? What have we rejected from those beliefs? How can we cohere a supportive space for those whose beliefs are different from ours? How can we establish connection with those who might judge our beliefs or not support our beliefs? And where do we know that our lineage traces back to in terms of mitochondrial DNA or family trees? In February, we're going to be working on compassion, understanding, and forgiveness. What are the things that have been left unsaid or undone? Relationships that were never repaired? How do we find a way to reconcile our feelings about those who have gone before us, maybe who didn't approve of us, or maybe who never knew who we truly were? How do we make connection, compassionate connection, with those who were lost under traumatic circumstances, such as a family uh, splitting apart, a divorce, or sudden death, a traumatic death? How do we help our beloved ones to move in a better way in the afterlife and bring them back to the table of supporting the legacy of the entire family? And in March, we move into reckoning and release. Are there any ancestors in the bloodline who caused so much damage that it's not able to be repaired at this time? How do we hold space for the people who have been victimized in our families by elders or by ancestors? Do we have any ancestors that embraced philosophical positions or political values that we do not share and who may have acted on them? For example, reconciling legacies of colonization, enslavement, or traumatic marriage or traumatic birth. How do we release that pain and trauma from the bloodline without pinning it as a scapegoat on one person? How do we cleanse and move beyond the legacies of of earlier times that are not as enlightened as the ones that we're living in now, or the ones that we wish to embrace? In April, we're going to then delve into how are our family relationships created from our ancestral legacies? What have we inherited from our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents in terms of how we relate in marriage, in love, in parent child, in friendships? Do we have an example of not trusting people outside the family and thus always kind of holding people at an arm's length? Do we have legacies of trying to whitewash things and glaze over things so that people haven't learned the true art of apology? This kind of relational, emotional, and family matters, topic can also help us address, did we have families that felt that there was an expectation to hold secrets for each other? Or are there shameful secrets floating around that have negatively impacted relationships within the family? And how do we work spiritually through those topics, elevating the best of our family relationships, the best of the love, the laughter, the care, the collaboration, the creativity, and the sweetness that's there? And how do we change or transform or integrate the shadows of those relationships so that they become sources of strength in the family line rather than sources of trauma? In May, we're going to go deep into divination with ancestral guides. And during that month, we'll be doing a lot of different types of readings as a way to connect with potentially benevolent, durable, long-standing ancestral guides who want to partner with us in this work. And hopefully you can see that when we work through these first 4 months, where there's a lot coming to the surface of reconciliation, forgiveness, of release, of boundary setting, that then and only then can we actually start the process of seeking out and establishing a guide, or more than one guide from our ancestral lineage, who is stable enough to truly partner with us at the level of work that we're doing. In June, we're going to talk about what are the family traditions. These could be holiday traditions, cultural traditions. They could be little silly, simple, funny traditions. And what do we want to bring forward in our current families and future families? And what new traditions are we establishing in our lives, in our households, either for ourselves and or for future generations? In July of this coming year, we will focus particularly on the witchcraft, sorcery, and folk magic available to us through our bloodlines. And this one is such an interesting one for me. I'll just say a little, I'm just going to pause here to say this. I grew up thinking I was magical and that my parents weren't, to be perfectly honest. My mom will laughingly tell you she doesn't have a creative bone in her body, but that she's very strategic and a really good researcher. My dad was very creative, but if you breathed the word magic in his direction, he thought you were talking about card tricks. I grew up very different from my parents, who were very devout Catholics, and myself, I felt like I was this, kind of sparkly unicorn that came out of nowhere. And I must say that the deeper I've gone into my ancestor reverence, the more humbled I am in my assessment of my family lineage. When I went to France earlier this year to the Romani festival of Sarikali in the Camargue, where the river or the fresh water meets the sea, I was presented with a vision of my own French ancestry, celebrating this confluence of sacred waters in the same way I do today, even though our practices would have looked very different. When I went down a rabbit hole recently studying about the Romani people in Poland, I learned that the Black Madonna that is venerated by the Romani people in Poland is an hour away from where my grandfather was born. The magic runs much deeper than we think it does. And so in July, we're going to delve deep into that familial magic. And in a way, it will have been coming through the whole time, but that's a month where we're going to really focalize it. In August, we're going to talk about the legacies of transit over waters. And that might include a lot of different things. That might include the legacies of the colonizer as well as the legacy of the colonized, the legacies of slavery, as well as the hopeful journeys to a new world with nothing but your shirt on your back in order to try to have a better life. It will cover what happened when we had to leave everything and flee dictatorships. It will cover, larger topics that have impacted most of us in our lives in ways that today aren't visible on the surface, but have shaped who we are. And we're going to work on reconnecting with the places of our birth. We're going to talk about and even plan ideal pilgrimages to family locations, regardless of whether we can afford to go or we go. But we're going to really go deep into, if I were to go back to whatever is my motherland, where would that be? And what would my journey entail? And what would be the things that I'm looking to do? And then we're going to start to see how we can do some of those things right from here. In September, we're going to go deeply into ancestral herbal traditions. You'll be researching the herbal traditions of your bloodlines, and we will each be making teas, tinctures, incense, honey, or other types of herbal products where the essence of that product is a match for the blood that's running through your body. In October, we have our topic is legacies of light. And that's going to be where we're going to be conceiving of our legacy projects. What is it that I am destined to leave behind that reveals the best of my family line? Whether that's, you know, my child, whether that's a book, whether that's a piece of art, whether that's a project of good works, whatever your legacy of light is, that's where we'll be working on that. In November, we're going to make formal commitments to the guides who have proven themselves and in our ancestry to be the most reliable. And these can be guides from within our bloodline, ancestors of blood, or they can also be ancestors of affinity. For example, one of my ancestors of affinity is Frida Kahlo. Ever since the first time I ever saw an image of her, I felt absolutely instantly galvanized and magnetized to her. I've been to her home numerous times. I'm about to go again. I again and again return to her work and to her words when I need solace or comfort in my wild heart. I feel that she understood something about suffering that is so profound that again and again, whenever I'm going through difficult times, I turn to Frida Kahlo for wisdom. She's an ancestor of affinity, even though we're not related. So in November, we'll be making those formal dedications to say, yes, I will work with you. You are an ancestor in my personal court of assistance and help. And then our final class for the first year is becoming an ancestor. What does it look like for us to get our affairs in order to the best of our ability? And I'm not talking necessarily about paperwork. I'm talking about figuring out who is it that we want to be in the second half of our lives for however much time we have left. And what kind of person do we want to be if we stand at the threshold of death? Who do we want to be when we meet that threshold? So that summarizes the first year. There will be 3 tools required in the first year. You may already have one of these, a rattle. You will need a rattle, and this is going to be what we use rather than a drum for our journey work. I find that when I drum, I definitely go into trance and I'm able to connect with beings and go places. But when I use the rattle, I hear words and voices and messages more. So this is the reason why we're going to entrain to the rattle. And you want a rattle that has a soft shh, shh, shh sound rather than a clack, clack, clack sound. So you can hear, I have this is a sort of I don't know if you can hear it, but it's a very gentle rattle. It makes a sort of a round sound. If I were to pick up my sistrum, you hear that that's more of like a clack, clack. So you want a shh, shh sound for your rattle so that you can hear the whispers of the ancestors in it. You're also going to need to get a tarot or oracle deck that you will consecrate only for use when talking with the dead. One of the things about working in the realm of the dead is whatever is for the dead is only and always forever for the dead. So like, whereas in some traditions, we might put offerings on the altar of a deity and then later take them and eat them like little bits of candy as prasad or as a blessing, take little vials of water home as a blessing. With the dead, we never do that. Whatever we give to the dead remains in their realm, goes to their realm, stays in their realm. So when you consecrate the deck that you're going to use for your divination with your ancestors, thereafter you will only ever use that deck to talk to the dead. And then finally, as we get closer to the second half of the year, I'll be sending out a list of the media that you need for making your potions. So we'll need alcohol, or if you don't consume alcohol, we can use glycerin. We'll need honey, we'll need agave, we'll need some, jars, empty jars and labels and things like that. And then you will be researching which herbs you're going to get to use for making your apothecary, your ancestral apothecary. Working within the paradigm of ancestry, it only serves to increase our cultural sensitivity. We represent so many lineages and legacies. As the there's a great quote that says, "I feel my ancestors behind me saying, 'You are the result of the love of thousands.'" And it's true that each of us is. And at the same time, that doesn't mean there aren't complicated factors that come up. To be able to say, I may not belong to this challenging legacy. I don't personally believe that, but my ancestors did. And therefore, I have a responsibility to make some form of reparation. Or to be able to say, I belong to a persecuted people. I am a daughter of the persecutor and the persecuted. These challenging complexities come to the surface, and rather than shying away from them, ancestor work invites us to come into them with sensitivity, awareness, compassion, and kindness. The reality is, the deeper each of us goes into our ancestry, the more visible it becomes that there is not one single person on the planet who is not carrying some form of a burden that is related to the past. And so when we find ourselves up against uncomfortable topics or difficult topics around these legacies, our cultural sensitivity is only increased by listening to the real stories coming out of the real voices of our sisters. And it's my hope that then we're able to bring that out into the world to help do our part to resolve some of the most painful and intractable issues of our day when we are in real time with real people, not just in a sort of a thought bubble of our own opinions. Everyone in this class is going to be invited to take a DNA test, either with one of the major companies. It can be Ancestry, it can be 23andMe, it can be anybody. I understand that there are, though, some people who might not feel comfortable with that. Please know that if you choose not to take a DNA test, that's totally fine. You don't have to do it. And as long as you can start to do some of the work of tracing your own family tree and learning about where you've come from and who your people are, you can still do a lot within this course. I will just say this, that sometimes DNA testing offers us detailed and granular information that can resolve certain lineage questions or help us understand ourselves better. And one perfect example of this was when I was in Turkey for the first time in 2021. I went there and, I didn't know that I had any Turkish DNA. I had my ancestry report had only showed Polish, French, English, Irish, and German. And then imagine my surprise after getting back from Greece, Turkey, Crete, and discovering that the following spring, my DNA details were updated. They had now detected that there was 2% of me that belonged to that region of the world, the Mediterranean and Levant. And I felt like I went to Turkey and turned on my Turkish DNA. So sometimes working with DNA testing can bring really some fun results, but I just want to say I respect everyone's autonomy. I know not everyone feels comfortable to take the test. I just wanted to put it out there that if you don't want to take it, it's not a deal breaker. If you do want to take it, we will be working with this information in some capacity. There is recommended reading for each year of this training. For year 1, here are 3 of the books that I'm recommending. Honoring Your Ancestors, which is a guide to ancestor veneration. This does take more of a folk Catholic approach, but I found that really helpful having grown up Catholic. Ancestral Whispers is a really great cross-cultural book, very appealing to people from lots of different backgrounds. Ancestral Grimoire by Nancy Hendrickson is a great book about actually working with divination, oracles, and magic with your ancestors. The Book of Ancestors is by Claire Goodchild, and it's again a book about ritual and ceremony, very helpful for working with your beloved dead. The Witch's Book of the Dead by Christian Day is a really fantastic guide to, particularly if you want to communicate with people beyond the veil. He is very good at this. This is one of his secret superpowers, is that he always has one foot in that world. And his book, this is the 10th anniversary edition of this book. It's been a very popular book. And The Magic in Your Genes by Carol Crow. She graduated priestess training with this temple, and she wrote a book about your personal path to ancestor work, where she's doing a lot of the bridging of the DNA along with magic and ritual. So if you're interested in working with the DNA aspect, particularly interested in working with the genealogy aspect of ancestry, then this book would be enjoyable for you. Then in year 2, and I know, maybe some people are feeling like, yeah, they'd like to do that one. And maybe some people are like, I'm not so sure. I thought I'd just share with you what we're going to be talking about in year 2. In year 2, I'm going to be joined by 2 other death midwives, Priestess Heather and Priestess Cosette, who are both trained, as I am, to work with end-of-life issues. And Priestess Heather is a nurse. She's also a participant in a end-of-life nurses honor guard that goes to the funerals of nurses and honors them for their service. Priestess Cosette is working in a hospital setting. So they both are kind of having a foot in that medical world where a lot of the end-of-life issues arise. And for my part, I'll be bringing in more of the ritual aspects, and they'll be kind of helping with some of the psychological and practical and ritual aspects. So first month of year 2, January of year 2, the journey to the other shore. What is death? When it happens, what is it? How does it happen in the body? What are the things that show that it's coming? In February, we'll work on death of pediatric death of children, working with children at the end of life, or working with grieving parents or families of children who have passed. In month 3, we'll be working, our topic is the Rainbow Bridge, and we'll be working with animal death, pet death, the loss of beloved animal companions, and cultural approaches to the deaths of our animal companions. In April, we'll be talking about death and how it affects relationships, coping with widowhood or being a widower, as well as how to support widows and widowers in their journey. In May, we're going to really talk about things like enjoy the ride is sort of shorthand for what happens when someone receives an end of life or terminal diagnosis, or when they know that the end is near, how to facilitate the greatest possible enjoyment of every moment, presence, the enjoyment of the body, the enjoyment of the senses. We're going to talk about some topics in April and May of next year related to things like sexuality as we age. We're going to be talking about how to enjoy our bodies without harming our bodies, and what does it look like for people who come to an early death as a result of addiction. So there's a lot of themes in April and May of the second year that are about some of those trickier or more complicated subjects around end of life. In June of next year, or in June of the second year, we'll talk about, what does it actually look like to prepare for the journey of death? And we'll start with mental and spiritual preparation. We'll talk about things like people coming into a conversion experience or reawakening religious beliefs, even if they didn't have them before at the end of life. We'll talk about how we come into our own reconciliation with our own spiritual beliefs about the end of life, and how to face the great mystery with consideration, compassion, and grace. In July of the second year, we're going to talk about working through our stuff, and that is household objects, legacy items, inheritances, precious pieces, the things we want to make sure don't get lost, the things, we're going to look at different habits the world over that people cultivate, and also habits that take over. For example, the difference between having the cultural zeitgeist in Sweden, where after the age of about 60 or 65, people start doing what they call their death cleaning. They actually give a lot of their objects and items away before they die so that they can see their loved ones enjoying them, or so that they can be unburdened of things that, they don't use or need, as contrasted to a rising trend in America where we see end of life hoarding, where people keep purchasing or buying or hoarding objects as a kind of a naive hope of insulating themselves against death. So we'll be comparing and contrasting how the objects in our field impact us at end of life, and how we can help people deal with that. And we'll also be bringing in some aspects there of psychometry, holding an object and figuring out, why was it important? Who did it belong to? Where did it come from? In August of the second year is when we look at the paperwork, what we call for the record, living testimonies, wills, end of life preferences, resuscitate, do not resuscitate, things that will help keep your family out of probate, the movement of generational wealth and what its implications are, being sensitive in the construction of one's end of life paperwork, making sure that there's a paper trail that's easy to find so that one's family members aren't unduly burdened with trying to figure out what someone wanted. And we'll be doing this for ourselves, as well as learning how to help another person prepare that. In month 9, September of the second year, what does it look like to really and truly let go, or to help someone let go of the things that are cluttering their mind? At what point do we finally say to ourselves, this situation can't be fixed? And how do we come to terms with regrets? What are the things that we need to clean out of our psychological and emotional field in order to be able to go freely and with a lighter heart into the next world? In October of the second year, the time has come. This is going to be a kind of a detailed breakdown of what happens, what is a kind of a checklist of the things that happen when someone dies, where we basically create a walkthrough of a sample death. And we'll probably have a few different test cases that will help us to bring together the different aspects of what we've already learned so that we could be of service to an aging family member, somebody who needed our help, a friend, or somebody who's been sort of caught without a plan and calls upon us and says, "Can you help walk me through this?" In November of the second year, honoring the dead will be all about funerary practices from ancient to modern, the world over. Beautiful ways to honor and memorialize someone, as well as what happens with bodies. Where do we contact for help with the next stages? What it looks like to do an at-home funeral versus one in a more traditional setting, and the pros and cons of each, so that again, we'll be prepared for ourselves and for others in creating something that is genuinely beautiful and honoring of the person being memorialized. And finally, walking between worlds will be the culmination of the 2 years worth of work, where all along we will have been doing psychopomp work, communing with those beyond this world, and where finally we'll be bringing it to a conclusion with a set of ceremonies that we will be creating and that we will be, deriving from other cultural traditions to help spirits that get stuck along the way. And what happens when you go to a home and the spirit is still there? Or what happens when somebody dies and they don't know that they've died and their spirit is trapped or stuck? Or what happens when somebody doesn't know how to let go? Or what happens when someone has committed suicide and now their spirit is in between worlds? How can we facilitate ease and loving grace to help that spirit cross over? And what will be the signs that that was effective for us and for them? And in year 2, here are the recommended reading books. Die Wise by Stephen Jenkinson. It's a beautiful, deep, poetic book into how to prepare the mind to think about death. The Art of Death Midwifery by Jocelyn Saint-Pierre. She actually really, this book is one of the books that launched this movement of death midwifery, and it's a classic. It's like a fundamental work. Living into Dying by Nancy Jewel Poor is a book that's all about how do we make the most of the journey all the way up to the very end and over that threshold. It's a book about cultivating spiritual and practical joy amidst caring for death. How We Die by Sherwin Newland is another, foundational work in the death midwifery space. It is a socio-cultural analysis of death and what its meaning has become in our society. Accompanying the Dying by Deanna Cochran is all about what it looks like to actually companion someone across the threshold, and same with Cultivating the Doula Heart by Francesca Lynn Arnoldi. This book is the book that was written by the teacher, Francesca, who taught the program that I took and that Priestess Heather took through the University of Vermont. And it's a great book, really easy read, and gives you so much practical information about who to be when you're helping someone at the end of life. So just a little quick bio of me. I've, as I mentioned, been deep in this work of death midwifery for the past decade. I've helped numerous people at the end of their life. Particularly, I have a specific calling that presented itself to me again and again, of basically people who either were no longer in contact with their families or didn't have children or didn't have anyone else, a partner or anyone else in their lives, who reached out to me and basically onboarded me to walk them across that final threshold, and where I've been the person to assist, to take them to doctor's appointments, to sit with them, to give them comfort, to laugh with them, to help them through their decision-making process. And most importantly, in numerous cases, at least I can count on one hand immediately, to be the person who said to that dying person what no one else would say, which is, the time is now coming. What are we going to do? What would you like to have happen? Because in a situation where someone is alone, often the medical advisors will just keep putting treatments in front of them until there's nothing left. Or somebody who doesn't want to go into a medical establishment might not have someone who's willing to have that kind of direct conversation. But I've been invited in to be that person on numerous occasions. And what it's taught me, most of all, I mean, I'm going to teach you a lot of technique, and I'm going to teach you a lot of history. I'm going to teach you about cultural sensitivity. I'm going to teach you about mechanisms for accomplishing the magical, spiritual, emotional, psychological, and physical steps. But the thing that I really want to impart, the thing that has called me to do this training, is to teach people to be fearless and unflinching in the face of the great mystery, to look at it and say, hello, friend. Here you are. We're at the end. How can I serve? So for all the things that my bio says, that's the thing I want to do the most, is to be the person who helps you get to that point of looking death in the eye and saying, hello, friend, how can I serve? The benefits of working in this program that I've identified based on the combination of doing our own ancestor work and then building on it so that we're able to be of service in the world are here. Number one, we will reveal lineage mysteries to ourselves. We will get into the depths of our own lineage, and we will be able to make real change in our lives based on what we see there. We will transform our spiritual practice. Ancestor work becomes a part and parcel of everything you do once you have the right system for it. There's then never not a time that you aren't aware of it. And so allowing your spiritual practice to make greater room for ancestral support, veneration, reverence, and healing is a benefit. We will experience personal metamorphosis as we heal things in our DNA, in our bloodlines, in our energetic legacies. We will see the practical results manifesting in front of us. It's how we'll know that the work is working, and it's how we'll then know that what we have to contribute can be of service to others. It's really good to do this in a sacred sisterhood. I'm very grateful to have other women in this temple who gather, we gather monthly around our priestesshood. We gather monthly around our divinations. It's a safe and sacred space to talk about the things that might not be as easy to talk about elsewhere, or might not be as well received elsewhere. For example, if I start to talk about death and end of life issues with my husband, I watch his eyes glaze over and I see inside of him the scared little boy that doesn't really know what to make of death. And I think that death brings out that inner child for many people. Being in a sacred sisterhood of other unflinching sisters means that we have a place to go to talk about these kinds of things. And then finally, it's really that I feel like I'm able to help you with this because I have walked through it so many times. I have cultivated that unflinching sense. I have been with people in some of their most desperate hours, and I feel like my job is to basically support you in having your own version of that, whatever that looks like for you. And for you to then know that there's someone you can go to who will never be shocked, will not be put off, will not be scared of whatever it is that you need to share about your journey. So this is the conclusion of the presentation part about this, just kind of the general overview. And I thank you so much for watching and for coming. I'm going to stop the recording now, and then we can have a little time for Q&A.